Okay, thank you. I'm an addict called Vito. And first of all,
Hey, Vito. Vito. Yay. Hi, Vito.
thank you. And I'd like to thank the group for allowing me to come here and speak, and particularly asking me to come and speak. I don't do too many Zoom meetings because our meeting's been open here in Florida for ever since about a month after COVID, and I have to limit myself to 2 Zoom meetings a month because otherwise I won't be able to fulfill my service commitment to the meetings that I go to. So it just happened that we were able to work this out so I could be here today. And I really appreciate it because NA meeting is an NA meeting, but I am so loaded with service positions and so forth. I have to do that in what regular meetings I go to, but I do take time to get on the Zoom platform, and I do 2 Zoom meetings a month. So I do a little bit of it. And again, I'd like to thank everybody here for allowing me to come. And this meeting's coming from Europe, and Europeans really amaze me. They can speak all these different languages. I can speak English, and not good English at all, and a little bit of Italian from when I was a little boy before it was my first language. And every time I meet Europeans, they're speaking 3, 4, 5, 6 different languages. I say to myself, how the heck do they do that? I can barely speak English. So anyway, I like to admire you people on that side of the pond. I've been around here for a little bit. I picked up a 63-year medallion on Tuesday. So I'm starting my actually 64th year. I'm 2 days into the 64th year. And I didn't think I'd live until be 25. And here I am, 83 now. So, I came in here as a boy in 20s, and here I am as an old man. So I actually grew up in this fellowship, so to speak. And when I say grow up, I really mean grow up, because when I came in here, I was dysfunctional, immature, and so forth. And, first of all, I really didn't believe that everybody was clean when I walked in here, because where I came from, I grew up in the Bronx, which is a section of New York City. Everybody used. It was just a way of life. I didn't know anybody who didn't use from, my neighborhood. And so, I had some trouble. But first of all, let me tell you my history with NA. There was another NA before this NA in New York City. It was called Narcotics Anonymous, and it was started in 1949 by 2 Puerto Ricans, Danny Carlson and a girl by the name of Ray Lopez. And that went from 1949 to 1972. And that's the fellowship that I came in. I came in Narcotics Anonymous, the New York Narcotics Anonymous, in 1959. I relapsed, and I came back in February 1960. And, I'm probably 1 or 2 or maybe 3 people left that we went to both NAs. I know that Fran D, used to be Fran O, she's Fran D now. She was from Hawaii. She's back in New York now. She was part of that. And there was a guy in Detroit now that was part of the old NA too. So there's 3 of us left. But I came back in 1960. I was living in a dumpster for that year in 59 when I relapsed. And it was a place called Church Station in East Orange, New Jersey. And I was living there by the railroad station, because it was a commuter station where all the people get on the trains to go into New York to work, and I could go and make my hustle there. Well, on February 13th, 1960, was the last time I crawled out of my dumpster trying to make it to the station to make a hustle there. It was a cold night. It was very cold. It was snowing, and I was very sick. And I never made it to the station. I fell down. The snow was covering me, and people would walk over me like I didn't exist. And most addicts know what that feeling is. We can be in a crowd of people, but people act like like we're not even there. Well, somebody had some, I guess, sympathy or mercy, whatever you want to call it, and they called an ambulance, and they took me to a hospital. And when I got there, they diagnosed me that I was suffering from both infectious and serum hepatitis from dirty needles and dirty living. And I was contagious, and they had to put me into what they called an isolation ward, because the people couldn't come near me because they would catch the infection. And I was admitted into a hospital of something we call in America with welfare, which simply means you're indigent, you don't have any money, the state takes care of you. And so I didn't have the best medical care. As a matter of fact, the doctor that they assigned to me was a resident. He was doing his internship in the United States, and he was from Greece. But this guy would come in and take care of me. And I think I was in that isolation ward. I really don't remember now, 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks. I don't remember. But he would come in and he would say that the man, when we say the man in America, we mean police people, are wanting to talk to you. And they can't come in here because you're contagious. But you'll be getting out of here in about 4 or 5 days. And I want to offer you a deal. Now, when addicts hear the word deal, we grow great big ears like Dumbo. We listen to everything. And he said to me, he said, there's a place upstairs where there's people similar to you that maybe if you go up there, the man will forget about you and you'll be able to get some rest and get better. Now, in that part of the country in the United States, in February, it's very cold. It's snowing all the time. And, you know, I'm not the brightest person on the block, but I do know that when it's cold outside and I get an opportunity to stay inside with 3 meals a day, it's not much of a brainer. So, of course, I said, yeah, I'll go. And when it was time for me to get out of that isolation ward, the nurses came in, and they had all my worldly possessions in a brown paper bag because that's all I owned. Everything fit in a brown paper bag. And we wore these hospital gowns, you know, ones where your ass cheek hangs out the back, but you can never get a button tight enough. And so we got on the elevator, and we went up to the 7th floor, I believe it was, and the door opens up, and there's a great big room with bed after bed after bed. It reminded me of an army barracks. And I said to the nurse, I said, what is this place? Now, you got to remember, this is before the time that they had detoxes or even rehabs. And she said, well, this is an alcoholic ward. And I looked at her like she's crazy. I said, why are you putting me with them sick people? Because at that time in my life, I didn't believe there was much difference between alcohol and drugs. I thought there was a big difference, was that what I mean to say. And she said, well, these are people similar to you. I said, yeah, but they're sick. I'm well. They can't stop drinking. I can stop using drugs anytime I want to. And she looked at me and she said, then why don't you stop? And I had the famous addict expression that we've all said, well, I don't want to, you know, and we've all said that at one time. So she said, look, you don't have to go in there if you want. You can take your brown paper bag, put your clothes on, and go. And again, I'm not that smart, but I'm not that dumb either. I said, no, it's cold out there. So I go in and I find a bed that has 2 walls on the side. It's a corner bed. Because most male addicts don't ever like their back exposed. We always want to see what's going on in front of us. So I figured this is a good spot. But I'm not going to get friendly with any of these sick people that are in here. I'll just put my time in. And then she says to me, she says, oh, by the way, we have a meeting here every Wednesday night and it's mandatory. I said to her, what kind of a meeting? She said, oh, there's a fellowship called Alcoholics Anonymous, and they come in every Wednesday, and everybody has to go to that meeting. I said, but I really don't want to. Can't I go outside and smoke or whatever? She said, no. If you don't want to go to that meeting, then you have to leave the facility. So, of course, I decided to stay. And when they would come in on Wednesday nights, I would stand in the back of the room with my back against the wall, and they'd be sharing about their drinking and everything, and I'd be laughing to myself. Because, of course, I believe there was a big difference between alcohol and drugs. And I got friendly with an old guy in that facility. And when I say old guy, I'm going to be very cautious right now. Because he was probably 40 years old and I was 20 years old. And ask any 20-year-old, a 40-year-old person is an old man. Because that's how we believe. I like to go back in time now, but that's not going to happen. And I got friendly with this guy. And at that time, we were going through the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And when you talk to him, he had the answers for everything. You know, you talk about the Cold War, he says, oh, I could fix it. I could break the Iron Curtain and all that. He seemed to have an answer about everything. You want to talk about God, he was on a first name basis with God. He was a know-it-all, like most male addicts. I can look back now and know that we were all the same. We know everything about everything, but we don't know shit. And so I got real friendly with this man. And then it was time for him to leave that facility. And he had to go back into the back room and put his street clothes on because we're wearing these hospital gowns. And when he came out, he was dressed as a Skid Row bum, a tramp. He had holes coming in his pants. Now I know you wear pants that people have holes in them. They spend a lot of money on them. It's fashionable. But back then it wasn't. He had holes in his knees sticking out of his pants. His shoes, his toes were sticking out. He wore a navy pea coat. The elbows were out of it. He was a Skid Row bum. But I looked into that man's eyes, and for the first time, I realized there wasn't much difference between me and him except our drug of choice. Oh, he'd get off on cheap wine, but I'd get off on anything I get my hands on. And so when he left, I started to listen to these people that brought the meeting in. And when it was time for me to leave that hospital, they told me the magic words for a homeless person. They said, if you go to those meetings, they have coffee, cookies, and donuts. And that's a pretty big invite when you're homeless. And so that first day I got out of the hospital, I looked up one of these meetings and I walked in there. And it was almost like time stood still because I walked in the door and it seemed like everybody was moving around, then everything stopped. And all the guys had jackets on and ties, and the women were all dressed up. It was a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, here I walk in, I got hair down to my butt, I got earrings down to my shoulders, I'm wearing a razor sharp Garrison belt, and I got spikes sticking out of my boots. And this old dude walks up to me and he says, "Hey, kid, what are you doing here?" And I said, "I was just in this hospital. They gave me this meeting list. They said, if I come here, I can get coffee, cookies, and donuts." He said, "The coffee, cookies, and donuts are over there. Help yourself. But this is a closed meeting for Alcoholics Anonymous, and you're not welcome here. Because you suffer from a disease that is illegal and immoral. And people like you just don't get better." But he took my meeting list from me and he circled some meetings and he said, "These are open meetings. They're great big speaker meetings. They're open. Kid, if you want to go there, you can go there. But why waste your time? Because people like you just don't get better." One thing is you don't tell an addict not to come back. So I would show up at these big open speaker meetings, and we got in front of the churches where the meetings were held. I see all these people standing in front of it, and addicts can recognize other addicts. And I began to see other people that looked like me, were behaving like me, and I gravitated to them. Sure enough, they were addicts. And when we would go inside that big open meeting, everybody else shifted to the other side of the room, like they were afraid of what they could catch from us. And they gave me a nickname there. They called me Animal. And I was sitting in 1960 in a meeting of that fellowship in the Valesburg section of Newark, New Jersey, when somebody came up and tapped me on the shoulder. And they said, "Hey, Animal, there's a drug meeting in the back room." Now, I didn't know what a drug meeting was, but myself and the herd of animals, we go to the back room. And there's probably nobody here in this meeting old enough to remember the 1960s. There was a culture of people called the Love Children, of the hippies of that generation. And they were similar to us street people, but different. They had long hair, but their hair was clean and washed. They wore T-shirts and jeans like we did, but their clothes were clean. They were a little bit different than us, but yet they were drug addicts also. And this one guy opens up the meeting and he says he was out of San Diego, California, and he was carrying a message that they got out there called Narcotics Anonymous. And when he said the word Narcotics Anonymous, I knew something about that name because, like I said, in 1959, I went to a fellowship in New York called Narcotics Anonymous. And he opened up that meeting and he started reading some literature. And the only piece of literature they had there was a little white book. And he opened it up and then he started thinking. And then he asked people to share. And I listened to people share. And I started to hear my thinking coming out of their mouths. And so I knew at that point that's where I belonged. I'd never be alone, never again. And this was called a rabbit meeting. And back then in the 60s, there was a lot of these rabbit meetings. They'd be here 1 or 2 weeks and then they go off as the hippies moved around. But I kept in contact with one of these guys who went back to San Diego. And I used to call him up once a week. And I said, "We have some trouble getting this NA going here because every time we get it going, we get a bunch of people coming in and then they disappear." And he said, "Where'd they disappear?" I said, "It was mostly guys coming in and then they get a couple of weeks, a month clean. Then they disappear and they go to AA because that's where all the girls were." And so we were losing addicts to AA because we had no women in our fellowship. So they would go there. Because addicts are a horny bunch of guys, I guess, especially when you're young. And so he said, "Well, why don't you come out to San Diego? We got some of this NA going out here." And I said to him, "Well, I really can't. I got a living to make." And he burst out laughing. He said, "What do you mean you got a living to make, Vito? You don't work." I said, "No. But back then in the 60s, in the United States, they would give you welfare, which is state fund, if you had either addiction problem or alcoholism, because they considered it a disability back then. They don't anymore today. And they would send you 2 checks a month from the state. And I would take that money, go down to the pool hall, and I'd play 9-ball all day long and multiply my money." I said, "Well, you got a living to make. I get welfare, and I go down to the pool hall and make that partly that money." He said, "Don't worry about it. We got welfare in California, and we got pool halls." So I hitchhiked across the United States, which is like 3,000 miles, I guess, in the metric system that you use out there would probably be 400,000. whatever they call meters or KLs out there. It's a long way. And it took me over almost 10 days to hitchhike out there. And when I got to San Diego, I get a hold of this guy and he asked where I'm at. And I told him, he said, okay, I'll be pick you up. He said, I live not that far away. He lived in a place called Old Town, a little outside of Old Town. And he came and he picked me up in this Volkswagen bus or van, whatever you want to call it, had peace signs all over. And I was a little embarrassed to get into it because I was a street person. I wasn't one of those hippies, but I needed a ride. So I go to his apartment and we're there all day long and there's addicts coming in and out. And he said, you arrived on a good day. We got 2 NA meetings in San Diego, one on Wednesday and one on Friday, and today's Wednesday. So about 6 o'clock, a bunch of us piled into this Volkswagen bus, and we go to a place, a big Catholic church, a place called Mission Hill. And when I get out into the parking lot, he says, now, Vito, do not mention NA, Narcotics Anonymous, in this parking lot or in the hall. I said, I thought we were going to NA meeting. He says, we are, but the church don't run to any addicts. We told them we were AA, and that's how we got in there. So sometimes I laugh when I hear people today say, we can't find a meeting place. We did it when it was impossible. The other meeting that we had in San Diego then was on a Friday night. Our landlord didn't care who we were as long as we paid the rent. It was the Black Panther Clubhouse. And so the rest of the week we had to go to the other fellowship. But as we were doing that, we were starting meetings all the time. Now, I'm clean a couple years, and I never worked a step, and I never had a sponsor because I wouldn't ask anybody to sponsor me because I figured everybody's too sick to sponsor me, like I'm the wellest one when I was probably the sickest one. But I see people starting to get better, and I'm still waiting for people to relapse so I can rob them. And so I said, maybe there's something to the sponsorship. So I asked this guy, would you sponsor me? He says, yeah, I'll sponsor you, Vito. Where are you with the steps? And I looked at him like a fool for asking me that question. I said, where am I with the steps? I'm done. I've heard them read for the last couple of years. And he just burst out laughing. And we know some people today that say, oh, I've worked the steps, I've heard them read. So he said, okay, what is the first step? What does that have to do with it? You tell me what the first step is. And I said, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction and our life. No, I said to him, we admitted we were powerless over drugs and our lives had become unmanageable. And he said to me, where does it say drugs in the first step? And I picked up the little book and it said, we admitted we were powerless over our addiction. I said, addiction, drugs, what the hell is the difference? And he said, I'll tell you what the difference is. Drugs is what you put in your body. Addiction is that funny looking thing between your ears. I said, what, me? He says, yes, it's a disease of attitudes, a disease of personality, a disease of running from responsibility. Beginning and using drugs is just a symptom of that disease. And he said, you never worked a step because you would have known what that first step was. And then he said to me, when it says we admitted we were powerless over our addiction, the word admitted is not strong enough. Because in our addiction, we admitted we had a problem many times. He said, but the word addiction in the first step is a 3-part process. The first thing we do is we admitted we have a problem. Then we accept what we just admitted, and then we surrender to what we accepted. And that's where the slogan came from, surrender to win. We admit, we accept, and then we surrender. And he said the first step is the things of our past and the things of our past we brought into recovery. The next 11 steps will become our future if we choose to live them. And he said the first step is like taking all your clothes off and standing in the middle of a main street. You're going to see some flashing lights come pretty fast if you're standing there naked. The rest of the steps in the second step, you put new clothes on. So it's not cool to work a first step and stand there naked for a long period of time. And the second step is that we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And he said, this is starting with the second step is where we gain power. We become powerless in the first step. But the second step on, we gain power, not our own power, but power through the steps and power through our higher power. And we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves restores us to sanity. And I said, well, we stopped right there. He said, why? I said, you don't understand. I'm different. I don't believe in this thing called God. I don't believe in it at all. I'm an agnostic. And I love the sound of that name. And he laughed at me and he said, Vito, why are you an agnostic and not an atheist? Well, I had to think about that. Nobody ever said that to me. And I said, just in case I die someday. Now, when you're 20 years old, you're never going to die. Ask any 20-year-old. I said, just in case I die someday, and there happens to be this thing called God, I want him to know I wasn't a damn atheist. I just didn't know. And he laughed and he said, you're nothing more but a chicken atheist. And, your sponsor calling you chicken. And he said, anyway, this step doesn't use the word God at all. It says a power greater than yourself. And a power greater than yourself is anything greater than yourself. And even if you believed in God, God doesn't open the sky and send a bunch of angels down to fix you. God always works through people, places, and things. And that seemed to make sense. And he said, for you, a power greater than yourself, that gets your attention, is pain. Because if it hurts enough, you're willing to take a look and change it. But a power greater than yourself will always be something outside yourself. People, going to a meeting, hearing something shared, something in literature, anything makes you stop and take a look at the insanity of doing it over and over again and expecting different results. And we as addicts, we practice that insanity all the time. We're in a dysfunctional relationship. It's horrible. It's fighting. It's craziness. And we break up. And what do? We get back into another relationship with the same person with a different name and different face. We do that over and over in everything in our life. We have that insanity. We go through it, and then we attract the same thing too. We're in a job. We hate the job. We can't stand our boss. We quit the job. And what do? We get another job at another place with a different boss, which is the same thing. So that's the insanity that we keep doing it over and over again. And he says, by practicing the second step, we come to believe that we can break that insanity and do things different. And then it was time to go to the third step, where we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. And there was that God word. And I said, I can't do this. I said, I told you, I don't believe in God. And he said, read what the step says at the end. And I did. It said, God as we understood him. And he said, Vito, do you know why that step says God as we understood him and not God as we understand him? I said, what's the difference? Understood, understand, the same word. And he said, no, it's not the same word. Because that says God as we understood him. Each and every one of us can have a personal God of our understanding, and it doesn't have to be the same as anybody else. It gives us the freedom to have our own higher power. Not think, because if that step said God as we understand them, Narcotics Anonymous would have an understanding of what God is, and it doesn't have that. Thank God that is God as we understood him, so I can have a God of my understanding, and so can you. And it said we made a decision. And what is a decision? A decision is really a commitment to try to do something. You may not be able to do it, but you made the effort, the decision to try to do it. So we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. What is our will? What is our lives? Well, our lives are everything that happens to us from the time we get up in the morning till the time we go to bed at night. What is our will? Our will is our reaction to everything that happens from the time we get up in the morning until the time we go to bed at night. It's very simple. The trouble with us addicts, we can complicate a one-car funeral. We don't know how to keep things simple. It's simple. My life is everything I do from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed. My will is my reaction to everything I do from the time I wake up to the time I go to bed. Very simple. But we as addicts have one thing in common, especially when we're new. Not an addict in the world knows how to respond. We react. Your girlfriend breaks up with you. I'll show her. I'll go out and use. Like she cares. The bank takes your car or your vehicle because you can't pay your bills. I'll go show the bank. I'll go out and use. Nobody cares. It's a gut reaction. It's a reaction that we as addicts do, and it gets us in trouble. And one of the keys of the third step is stop reacting and learn how to respond. And I said to my sponsor, well, how do you respond? He said, when you were a little boy, did everybody tell you to keep your mouth shut till you count to 10 or 20? I said, yeah, I heard that. It doesn't make any sense. He said, well, that's the key. Because the minute you hear something, you pause. You take your time. You count to 10 or 20. You process what just happened. Then you can make a response. But if you don't take the response, it's a gut level thing. I'll show them. And off you go. You do. Bad decision. And there's a slogan to the third step. It says, first thought wrong. And that used to be very common back in the days when we had bumper stickers for our cars. There was two bumper stickers that were very on most cars. The first step one, surrender the win, and the second was first thought wrong. To remind us when something happens, pause, don't react, learn to respond. And so that's the first 3 steps. And if we practice them, we can stay physically clean for a long time, but not forever, because it's not okay to be physically clean and spiritually dirty. And many of us in this program are spiritually dirty. I have seen people with decades clean and can't wait for somebody to get out of a rehab so they can pounce on them. Oh, let's hit this girl before she gets too well, to a 13-stepper. So it's not okay to be physically clean and spiritually dirty, because that's why we have steps 4 through 9 to clean us spiritually, emotionally, and mentally. And we have 10, 11, and 12, which are the maintenance and the growth steps. We maintain what we get from the first 9 and grow on top of them. And that's why the process of the steps is very important. Not just the first 3 steps, or 4 through 9, or the last 3. It's all the steps together. Because we have to realize, us as addicts, if I can tell a little analogy, it's like caterpillars crawling on the ground. We still have slush and the garbage and everything. We're caterpillars. And as we work the steps, we form a cocoon like a caterpillar does. And by the time we get to the 12th step, we come out as a butterfly flying above the ground that we used to crawl on. And that's why the steps are so important. They're a transitional process that takes me from a caterpillar crawling on the ground to a butterfly high above the ground with freedom. And that's why the steps are so important. The steps are like a 3-legged stool. And when I say 3-legged stool, because it's gravity centered. That's why they make 3 things. Because when you sit on a 3-legged stool, you're right with gravity. And one leg stands for the steps. The other leg stands for the traditions. And the third leg stands for the fellowship. What we're doing right now, a meeting, is fellowship. It's not Narcotics Anonymous. It's a fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. The steps are, and the traditions are the program of Narcotics Anonymous. And so we have the 3-part stool. We have to have fellowship. That's why I love in-person meetings, those loving hugs. They're very important. And then you have the traditions that teach us how to learn how to have relationships, because the relationships are formed in Narcotics Anonymous home group. We learn how to disagree without being disagreeable, and take that principle out into our private life, into our job life, and learn how to get along with other people. And the steps are for my personal recovery, because if I use the steps in my life, I know how to get things done. So I have to practice that 3-legged stool. I have to go to meetings. I have to have fellowship. But I need to work with a sponsor, learning how to work the steps so that I have the spiritual awakening of living the steps in my life. And if you've been around here for a long time and you're still working steps, you're in trouble. You should be living steps by now. And part of living the steps is teaching other people, working the steps with them so that they can learn to live the steps. And how to work the traditions so that you can have healthy relationships outside of Narcotics Anonymous. This program is a life-giving program. If we learn to live in it and we learn to work the program, our life gets better and better and better. There is nothing better than be able to grow and become that butterfly above the ground that we go. Is it simple? No. No, excuse me. It is simple. It's not easy. And there's a big difference between being easy and simple. But if we follow the thing, if we read the chapter 5 in our basic text called What Can We Do? There's all the ingredients to stay clean in that one chapter. It tells us what we need to do, that we need to work steps with sponsors, waiting for the spiritual awakening of living it. It tells us we have to do a 90 and 90 when we come in. If we follow the directions in chapter 5, what can we do? We have all the information we need to stay clean. Of course, we have much more literature that we can expand and involve on all the growth that we have. But Narcotics Anonymous, it saves lives. Narcotics Anonymous is miracle giving. Narcotics Anonymous is a way of life. And it's beyond your wildest dreams. Because if I had known what I would be and what would add it to me in the times that I've been here, I wouldn't have been able to believe it. It would have been a fantasy. And so I believe Narcotics Anonymous is the way out. Narcotics Anonymous is life-saving. Narcotics Anonymous is something that is a gift to us. And yet I see newcomers say, do I have to go to meetings for the rest of my life? I would not want to be where I didn't go to meetings, because it's given me the life that I want. And with that, I'm going to shut my mouth because I need to hear other people share. I want to thank you for allowing me to come here and share. Thank you very much. I love you all.